All right. So we left off with the first industrial revolution. This is a lot of these ideas, inventions, and plans are gonna come over from England and from Europe. So what we're looking at.
Don't interrupt my meeting.
All right. I am going to keep teaching. Let me. All right.
That was very odd.
Okay. So guys, hang in there with me, please. Thanks. Okay. Just a power outage. All right. So I'm gonna keep moving on despite the power outage. All right. So the Industrial Revolution brings about a change in technology, steam power, the steamboat invented by Robert Fulton, the locomotive invented by Peter Cooper. We've got the building of canals, the Erie Canal, the James River Canal System known as the Kanawha Canal System. New inventions like the Singer sewing machine, the mechanical reaper invented by Cyrus McCormick, Eli Whitney's cotton gin, which ironically was invented to get rid of slavery, but it increased not the need, but the want and demand for slaves during this era. If you can still see on your lesson, you'll notice that we have a image of Slater's Mill. This is Samuel Slater's Mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Do you all know what that mill is producing? Not wheat, not beer, not tobacco. These are all good guesses. Not alcohol. Clothes, textiles. Yeah. So this is a pivotal moment in American history. Thanks to the cotton gin, the textile mill technology, and the agriculture of the South, and the fast, rapid moving rivers in the North, and the large urban populations, you've got America as a booming textile manufacturing country and a massive agricultural cotton growing country in the South, but that is on the backs of slaves. What's very bizarre and ironic is the whole idea of growing cotton in the first place was just developed by slaves growing cotton in their own gardens to produce their own textiles, and then the crop became popular, and then it became really lucrative after the invention of the American cotton gin by Eli Whitney. So if you move on, we've got an image of Samuel Slater, the father of the American mill. Other mills will come in and compete. Another really famous mill was in Massachusetts, in Lowell, Massachusetts, the Lowell Mills. The majority of the people that worked in the Lowell Mills were your age and younger. So anywhere from like 10 to about 17, 18 years old was the normal age range of those working in the Lowell Mills. In fact, it's a pivotal moment in American history because these young men and women, but mostly women, are some of the earliest people to fight for labor rights in the United States and actually win them in the courts, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Economics, politics, societal tensions over class, race, all of that is intertwined during this era as well. It's also the growth of a lot of significant amount of transportation growth, movement on canals of goods and people. Places like the Erie Canal allow cities to grow, like Rochester, Syracuse, Cleveland, Chicago becomes hustling and bustling. Really the city that has the most growth as a result of the Erie Canal is New York, because now the Erie Canal connects the Hudson River Valley to the Great Lakes, and it just opens up trade globally for New York City and all of these other small towns like Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse and others along the way. Here in the American South, here in Virginia, we have to look at the James River Canal System and the Kanawha Canal. It connected from just south of actually where I grew up in a little area, the headwaters of the James River, the Cowpasture River, and the Jackson River. And this canal goes up all the way to the headwaters of the James on the border of Botetourt County and Allegheny County. And that canal keeps making its way on up into little towns like my hometown, Clifton Forge, Virginia. But what you have to realize is the idea for this canal is to connect the James River all the way to the Ohio. But there's some factors that lead it not to work out: money, politics, the oncoming Civil War, and then the biggest factor is the railroad that becomes really lucrative and productive. One of the greatest marvels, if you look at the map of the canals, if you look up to the Erie Canal, located in New York, DeWitt Clinton, the governor of New York, he had attempted to run for president against James Madison. It didn't work out. He is going to be the guy that gets behind the canal. They think he's crazy. They don't think it's going to work. It really becomes one of the greatest feats in engineering in modern world history. The Kanawha Canal you can see in Virginia, but you also, if you look at that map, you can see the inner workings of railroad and canals all throughout the country. But where are the majority of these railroads, canals, and turnpikes? In what region? The Northeast. Very good. It's located in the Northeast. That's really going to be an important factor going into the American Civil War, because that gives the United States, the Union, a leg up going into that war against the Confederacy. Some marvels of manufacturing that I just recently talked about: the Singer sewing machine, the mechanical reaper. Like, the sewing machine provides you the opportunity to sew clothes at home. Has anybody ever seen a Singer, Howland Singer sewing machine in their grandparents' house, or maybe their parents' house? Like a cast iron. You ever stubbed your toe on one of those? No fun. It's a bummer. So don't do it. I would not recommend it. My grandmother had like 2 of them. I'm like, why? Torture mechanisms for a kid running around barefoot. So we have the mechanical reaper. It increases the productivity of the American farmer. John Deere steel plow is going to be tremendously important. Samuel Morse, he brings both the telegraph and also photography to the United States from France. He inspires Matthew Brady. And then there's also a great deal of like what we would consider sort of laissez-faire capitalism, right? Like the idea that people have a situation to invent because they've got a free market economy. Therefore, the patent office becomes just sort of overflowing with patents, like this one you see here, the 1847 McCormick Reaper model. I don't know if you know much about the McCormick Reaper. You've probably passed, if you've ever driven Interstate 81 to Roanoke. Anybody out there? Interstate 81 to Roanoke or Blacksburg? Then you've passed the McCormick Farm in Steele's Tavern, Virginia. It is about halfway between Lexington, Virginia, and Stanton. Cyrus McCormick and his slave Joe Anderson invented the Reaper there, and they mass-produced it in Chicago. Any idea why they would mass-produce it in Chicago as opposed to Richmond, Virginia? We're not yet there. We're not far from steel on a large use of steel on a large production. Okay, it will become a larger industrial center than any southern industrial center. Very good. Another reason why. What's that? You're not wrong. Okay, it does connect to taxation, tariffs, and revenue. But there's another reason why they choose Chicago. Where's Chicago located? It's located close to a number of important waterways. The Great Lakes. Who said that? Nice job. Great Lakes. Lake Michigan. And then where can you ship it? What river can you ship it along? To Mississippi, very good. To the Missouri, to the Platte, right? This gives you an opportunity to mass produce, but also get it out to a large group of consumers. So, early labor rights. What are people fighting for? They're fighting for more pay. They're fighting for better work hours. You know, if I told you that you were expected to work 12 to 16-hour shifts, probably wouldn't be too happy about that. They're also fighting against what we would call limited liability, right? How many people in here have jobs, right? So everybody in this room that has a job, if any of us get hurt on the job, our employer is responsible for taking care of us. Yeah, workman's compensation, right? And if you're in a situation where that's not the case, you need to look out for yourself and make sure that is the case. Because over 100 years ago, people your age, people my age, we were fighting together to gain the most basic labor rights, right? And it's something that we've got to keep in mind for the most basic right. An 8-hour workday, the ability to have vacation, the ability for you to change your work shift, right? I mean, maybe you've been in this situation, but I would imagine most of you have said, you know what, I'm going to need to change my shift, and somebody's worked it out for you. That wasn't always the case. Not to mention the fact that, you know, what does this ultimately limit a large group of people from being able to do that are expected to work 12 to 16-hour days, 6 days out of the week? Okay, you can't play any video games, that's for sure. What else? Yes, it limits your ability to get an education. So, this is important. One of the earliest Supreme Court cases, Commonwealth v. Hunt, is going to actually provide the Lowell Mill girls. If you look at the next slide there, you'll notice the Howard Bloom and one of the women working in the Lowell Mills. These women were your age. These are the people going to the courts, fighting for the most basic rights we have in the labor force today. Something that is important to understand is this fight for labor rights, the fight for women's rights, the fight for voting rights. It takes there's a little bit of a hiatus there because of the American Civil War and the era of Reconstruction, and then we see that the labor movement and the women's rights movement pick back up during Reconstruction and into the what we would call the progressive era. What's up? You have a question? What's up? Yeah.
I was going to tell a story, but never mind.
Go for it.
Alright. So I was at work and this girl had slipped and fell on her head.
Mm-hmm.
And our boss or the manager told her to go to ortho on call.
Mm-hmm.
And then ortho told her to go to ER. And she figured out she was going to the ER. And they called her so yelling at her for going to the ER.
What?
Yeah, because she was going to have to go to ortho's call.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
And they got really mad.
Yeah.
I know it.
Yeah.
I know it can't.
Yeah.
She ended up getting concussion too.
Is she okay now?
Well, he's lucky he doesn't have a lawsuit on his hands. It's crazy. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's right. So,
Yeah, go for it.
so my mom, she works at this restaurant called Burger Bosch.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when she was in the kitchen, she was putting up like a sauce on this microwave that was really high. You know, she's a short woman, so she like goes and puts the sauce, you know, and heats it up. So then she tries to get it out. Someone distracted her, and the sauce fell on her arm.
Yeah.
And she got like second or third degree burns because of it.
Whoa.
And the manager, the owner, apparently she didn't pay the fee for my mom to put it in the hospital and like get it cleaned up.
Yeah.
And we're still like very salty about it.
Another lawsuit. I mean, not that I'm like, you know, saying go, not that I'm like, go lawyer up, but those are like basic protections in the labor force. That's crazy.
As long as it's coming out of their pocket.
I mean, if something happened to me right now here, they would take me to the hospital and be taken care of. It's just how it is. I Well, I mean, what do we talk? In general, no. I mean, we can talk more about, like, you know, I've worked a lot of jobs, so it's not like, you know, there's always been somewhere along the way a character building opportunity for me to be treated unfairly in the workforce, you know. So again, like, that's why I get passionate about us understanding, like, the rights we do have in the labor force were gained through blood, sweat, and tears, you know. All right. So this is the era of steamboats. There are multiple steamboat inventors. Fulton. We've got Fulton. We've got Henry Shreve is another. So the premise is that people are in competition. We also have the growth of canals at this period of time. Turnpikes are being built. Toll roads are being built during this era. Obviously, the most famous of the canals was the Erie Canal. Hewitt Clinton's vision to connect the Great Lakes to New York City and the Hudson River Valley. The Iron Horse, Peter Cooper's Tom Thumb. Also, interestingly enough, he's also the inventor of Jell-O. So Peter Cooper's Tom Thumb raced against a horse in Baltimore, Maryland in 1830. It lost the race because a belt broke, but it changed everything because that becomes revolutionary. There's another really, yeah, go for it. There's another really important guy during this era too. He takes all of his money that he made in shipping and he moves it to the railroad. And this guy's name is Cornelius Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt is going to build and interconnect all of these rail lines throughout the Northeast. He also builds a cathedral to transportation, Grand Central Station in New York, and he connects by rail New York and Chicago. We're going to talk a lot more about Vanderbilt as we move forward because he is going to be really the guy that motivates the growth of the railroad to like 30,000 miles of track leading up to the American Civil War. So if you take a look, we got Peter Cooper and we got the Tom Thumb. It's pretty hardcore, huh? All right, so the religious revival, the Second Great Awakening, this is a, hey, here we go. Let's see if this will turn back on. This religious revival is, it will inspire a moral crusade to end slavery, a moral crusade to gain rights for women. It will also inspire new religious movements. It also leads to the splintering of some religious groups like the Methodists, the Baptists, and the Presbyterians. The leading preacher of this movement is Charles Grandison Finney. He's a Presbyterian preacher. He's also one of the earliest voices of the abolitionist movement. Another religious group we should connect to the abolitionist movement would be Quakers. Preachers go out and preach in revivals. This is kind of an easy period to remember because it's exactly 100 years after the First Great Awakening. It occurs in the 1820s and 30s, whereas the First Great Awakening occurred in the 1720s and 30s. Another really famous guy is a guy named by the name of Peter Cartwright. He was sort of a barroom brawler, sort of a ruffian, and he was saved during the Second Great Awakening and becomes what is called a circuit rider, meaning he goes from town to town handing out Bibles and spreading the Word of God. This is also an era where we have some new religious movements. The Unitarian movement becomes very popular. Also, one of the largest growing religions in the world today was established during this era, and that would be the Mormon faith. So, the Second Great Awakening, again, it's an era of reform led by guys like Circuit Rider Peter Cartwright and abolitionist and Presbyterian minister Charles Grandison Finney. This is what preaching looked like during the Second Great Awakening. That's a revival in the backwoods of rural America. So let's talk a little bit about the Mormons. Joseph Smith, the founder of the church, was visited by the angel Moroni, who led him to a set of golden tablets that were deciphered by Smith himself, and this is what became known as the Book of Mormon. The Church of Latter-day Saints, as they became known, were persecuted in western New York, where the religion was founded. They were persecuted in western Pennsylvania. They were persecuted in in central Ohio. The group kept moving farther west to gain, really, in a sense, religious freedom, even though it was guaranteed in the First Amendment. They make their way out to Missouri, where Joseph Smith was arrested. There's a number of reasons why the Mormons were discriminated against. The religious factor didn't set well with a predominantly Protestant Christian group during this era, who still dominated the United States and local and state politics. They had a militia force that was led by Smith's brother. They voted in a block, meaning they voted the way that the prophet Smith told them to vote. And they also practiced polygamy, meaning they took multiple wives. So these were all issues that the Mormons were grappling with early on. Smith was arrested. A mob is going to rush in and kill him, and the new prophet will take control of the congregation and move them farther out west, and that gentleman's name is Brigham Young. Young sends them out, or leads them out to the Great Salt Lake. They establish what is now Salt Lake City, and this becomes the Mormon Zion, right? This becomes their final destination, and where they set up their temple, and they try to apply for statehood, but they're blocked. In fact, instead of being granted statehood, the federal government sends soldiers out to try to prevent them from continuing to lead their congregation. It's largely a bloodless war. The reason that they went out was because the Mormons were also creating alliances with hostile tribes in the eyes of the federal government. By the end of the Civil War, though, the Mormons are going to outlaw polygamy in their community, and they are going to enter as a U.S. state. Obviously, there's, the LDS today does not agree with polygamy, but there are some fundamentalist groups that are on the fringes of LDS that still do. So we talked about that in one of the other classes. There's a really interesting book that was written on it by John Krakauer called Under the Banner of Heaven. The Church of Latter-day Saints is still battling against these fundamentalist groups who have kind of, given them a bad name in the press over time. So here we have Joseph Smith on the left, who was killed by a mob in Illinois, and there on the right we have the new prophet Brigham Young, who will lead the people. They'll establish the college that bears his name, Brigham Young, in Provo, Utah, and the Mormons still, the Mormon faith and the Mormon people still dominate the communities of much of Utah and parts of the Midwest today. All right, changes in public education, changes in education in general are inspired by this Second Great Awakening. A lot more public education during the era. you've got more opportunities for African Americans and women in some places. So we've got Sunday schools and schools established for free African Americans. Women colleges are going to start to open up for women, female seminary colleges. We have influence on early educators like Noah Webster and Webster's Dictionary, William McGuffey's McGuffey Reader. Has anybody ever heard of Oberlin College before? This is the first integrated college where white students and African American students were able to attend college together. Charles Grandison Finney was one of the professors there. Colleges are starting to sprout up all over the South. Hampton, Sydney, and Washington College will become Washington University in Lexington, Virginia. Military schools, West Point in New York, founded as a federal institution, my alma mater, the Virginia Military Institute, the oldest state-supported school, founded in Lexington, Virginia. Naval Academy. You also have other state schools like the University of Georgia is the first state-supported college. The first state-supported college to graduate a student is the University of North Carolina. University of Virginia, founded in 1819 by Thomas Jefferson, not too far behind. Changes in curriculum during this era. We have some early female institutions like Troy Female Seminary, established by Emma Willard. Mary Lyon established Mount Holyoke Seminary in Massachusetts. This is also a renaissance for literature, public lectures, the building of libraries, publication of magazines and national articles. This is the father of the public education movement, Horace Mann on the left, and that is the McGuffey Reader. I'm sure everybody in this class in first, second, or third grade, you guys probably sat together and read together in class, right? And you had a reader. That all started in the 1830s and 40s with the McGuffey Reader. So do keep in mind there is a temperance movement that is tied to the women's rights movement. A lot of evangelicals and a lot of women and men and children want alcohol to be banned in the United States. This created a significant amount of tension and division. There are going to be people that are going to establish publications like the children that were part of the Coldwater Army are going to write their testimonials in 10 nights in a bar room, and what I saw there as a testimonial to like the debauchery that's occurring in local bars. Women like Carrie Nation carry around hatchets, bust into saloons, and break open kegs and knock over bottles and destroy saloons as a result of the temperance movement. Neil Dow, the mayor of Portland, Maine, decided to outlaw alcohol, which ultimately led to what became known as the Rum Riots on June 2nd, 1855 rather. And what we have is one person ends up dead, 7 are wounded in 1855 as a result of the Rum Riots. And what they've got here is they've lampooned in this political cartoon an Irish immigrant, right? That he's the king mob and he sits on a throne of rum. And this is like temperance, anti-alcohol propaganda. The ladies want the right to vote. The ladies want the ability to own land. The ladies want the ability to get an education. The ladies want the right to basically have equal and civil rights in the United States. This is an era in which nearly all rights were taken away from women. The most basic rights, let's say you were a young woman who inherited a large sum of money and a large amount of land. if you got married, you lost it all to your husband. So a lot of women that became very successful in business, who were either widowed or had large inheritances, they didn't marry because they knew they were going to lose that wealth and inheritance. This inspires women like Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Carrie Catt, Elizabeth Blackwell, your first female medical graduate, Margaret Fuller, Angelina and Sarah Gremke, two sisters who were not only suffragettes but also abolitionists. Sojourner Truth, another suffragette and abolitionist who had been a former slave. Harriet Tubman, Amelia Bloomer, who was the inventor of basically female underwear and undergarments. That's why we call underwear bloomers, because of Amelia Bloomer. And then also one of the most interesting characters during this era, Carrie Nation, who wielded a hatchet against bar rooms and saloons. Two of the women in this group, Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, founded the 1848 convention known as the Seneca Falls Convention. This is going to produce the Declaration of Sentiments, where they say all men and women are created equal. Hundreds of women meet here, and really what's kind of sad is what stifles the women's rights movement is the American Civil War. And the irony of that is the American Civil War is not fought nor won by the Union without women. Women win the American Civil War. Their labor, their ingenuity, and their ability to take on new roles in more than just the labor force during the war. Women do not gain the right to vote until the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. So women aren't even going to get the right to vote until the end of World War I. Here we have Lucretia Mott on the top left, Elizabeth Cady Stanton on the bottom left, Susan B. Anthony, and then there's Carrie Nation with her hatchet. All of these women, or most of these women rather, are in some way, shape, or form tied to what religious movement? They weren't all practicing this faith, but most of them were raised in this faith. Nope. They are Christian, but it's a certain type of denomination that we've learned about that promoted equality among all of its parishioners. That is, Presbyterian's a good guess. Quakers, very good. Quakers, excellent. The Second Great Awakening, interestingly enough, also inspires what in our minds would be a bit of a hippie movement, all right? 120 years before the hippies were ever around, there were commune societies that were established in the United States. In the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, groups like New Harmony, which was an intellectual movement led by Robert Owen, Brook Farm, which was led by Transcendentalists George and Sophia Ripley. These two highly sort of intellectual groups, they fell apart for a couple of reasons. Number one, financing. Number two, infighting within the commune, right? Because in a commune, everybody kind of shares everything, right? So you're talking about sort of not just sharing wealth, but also free love. 120 years before that, most people even think that that movement began. One of the most successful communities was the Oneida, and I would say that's one of the most peculiar. The Oneida community was a community that was established by a group of parishioners that believed Christ had already returned to earth and the rapture had occurred. Therefore, they were free of all original sin. Therefore, they lived however they wanted to live. Ironically enough, they actually made their money through capitalistic venture. And you guys are probably all familiar, or you will be familiar, with how they made their money. If you take a look around your house sometime, see if you have a knife or some silverware or maybe some pottery, like ceramic, that has the label Oneida on it. Take a look sometime. They made really good dishware. They made really good knives and silverware. And they were able to sustain their community. It's kind of crazy. They practiced free love, birth control, eugenic selection to try to produce a superior offspring. Guys, this is in the 1840s, all right? It's kind of crazy to think about. Whoa. All right. Then, sort of like the polar opposite, my apologies over there. Then, sort of like on the polar opposite, is a group called the Shakers. The Shakers were a sect of the Friends of God who basically kind of died out, right, after the American Civil War and into the turn of the 20th century. They were also some of the first conscientious objectors in the American Civil War. What does that mean? Yeah, they're not going to fight, right? So the reason that the Shakers didn't make it is because they died out due to an oath of celibacy. Here is Robert Owen's vision for New Harmony, Indiana. It just didn't take off. They didn't have the money. Looks very Westminster Abbey. Kind of interesting. So this is an era where we have advancements in science. Guys like Nathaniel Bowditch and Matthew Fontaine Maury became map makers and oceanographers. The map maker of the ocean seas, Matthew Fontaine Maury. Asa Gray, Harvard botanist. Benjamin Silliman, geology and chemist at Yale. John James Audubon, study of plants, animals, birds. You're probably familiar with the Audubon paintings we'll take a look at here in a minute. You also have kind of a hold up in the advancement of medicine. Where we really see advancements in medicine is a result of the Crimean and the American Civil Wars. If you've ever gone down Monument Avenue or up Monument Avenue and you're wondering, what in the world is that statue? Who is that guy? That's Matthew Fontaine Maury. He was the map maker of the ocean seas. He is going to be Confederate Secretary of the Navy, and he will also serve as a professor of physics at the Virginia Military Institute. Anybody ever seen an Audubon painting before? If you haven't, I have. His artwork is famous from this era. Transcendentalism. I don't know if, has anybody in here studied the Transcendentalists before? It's a group of writers that stress self-reliance, non-conformity, stress individualism. A lot of people get connected to the Transcendentalists when they go to college because you're on your own and you're like, yes, I'm doing this. I don't have to conform to society, I can do my own thing. So that's where they have a more of a... I encourage you to read the Transcendentalists at some point in your days. Ralph Waldo Emerson, his work Nature and Self-Reliance are two that promoted a connection with nature, stress self-government, stress self-reliance, depending on one's own self. Henry David Thoreau condemned slavery, wrote On Walden Pond or Life in the Woods. He also wrote on the duty of civil disobedience. That would inspire Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for nonviolent protest. And then Walt Whitman, who served as a nurse during the Civil War, wrote Leaves of Grass. Most of the Transcendentalists, like Emerson and Thoreau, were closely connected to the abolitionist movement. And then this is also a big era for the American literary movement. We've got one guy we've talked about before, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. We talked about the Song of Hiawatha earlier in the semester and Paul Revere's Ride. John Greenleaf Whittier wrote about crimes of injustice, intolerance. James Russell Lowell inspired Mark Twain Bigelow Papers. Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the American Law Review and the book The Common Law. Louisa May Alcott, Transcendentalist, who wrote Little Women. I would assume we're all familiar with Emily Dickinson and her themes of nature and her works. William Gilmore Simms, the James Fenimore Cooper of the era. And then one of my personal favorites, Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote The Raven, but also the short story, The Telltale Heart. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that. Obviously, Poe's got connections to Virginia, most especially Richmond. I encourage you to visit the Poe Museum in Richmond if you ever have the opportunity. And that is where we're going to pump the brakes for now.